This week in IT SPARC Cast, Patch Tuesday needs Ozempic. Anthropic says you're using AI wrong, and why we have both a job shortage and a labor shortage.
At the same time?
Greetings and welcome to IT SPARC Cast. I'm your host, John Barker.
And I'm your host, Lou Schmidt. Let's see what's going on out there.
It's Monday, July 20th. IT SPARC Cast News Bytes. It's a digest of the IT news over the last week with insights, opinions, and a little sarcasm from two experts, each with over 20 years experience working in IT or for IT vendors. And now, the News Bytes. So an interesting article came from Krebs on security where they're talking about Microsoft's biggest Patch Tuesday ever. So the July 2026 Patch Tuesday that we just had addressed 570 security flaws.
Now, wait a minute, John. Didn't we have the biggest Patch Tuesday ever last month?
Right. And I'll bet you that next month, we're going to see a bigger one. And that's just because Microsoft addresses this. It's due to the AI tools out there that are being used to find these issues and exploit them. So let's talk about how that breaks down with those 570 vulnerabilities. 60 are rated critical. Roughly 250 are elevation privilege flaws. 3 were zero-day vulnerabilities. 2 actively exploited in the wild, 2 of those 0 days. And they were vulnerabilities in Active Directory Federation services and Microsoft SharePoint service. So nothing too critical, right? And then the third was disclosed before the patches were available, but didn't seem to have an issue in the wild or an exploit in the wild.
Good Lord.
So, yeah, Lou, I've got some thoughts on this, but why don't you go ahead and
all I can tell
thoughts.
You right now, all I can tell you based on what I'm seeing is if you're waiting for the patch to come, you're screwed, right? Yeah. You need to be going to far greater segmentation. You need to be going to zero trust. You need to be going to anomaly detection. This is not a new thing, folks. Yeah. This is not new. But if you don't have this stuff implemented, or the email from the CFO denying you the funding for this tucked away somewhere where nobody else can get to it, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
Right? So you need to be getting this stuff out there now. The patches are always after something has happened. So
always. And here's the thing. We've said this over the last several episodes and then during our CV of the week discussions, is that all the major operating system vendors and honestly all the major software vendors need to get to continuous patching.
Yes.
So that includes Apple. So they're not blameless here. Linux does this really well. And assuming that the right distribution gets the patches at the right time, but as at a core, the kernel of Linux generally does this really well.
Yeah, but you can get you can get live patching pretty much for any Linux if you're willing to go do a little bit of work. And you can update your patch database on demand, patch every 6 hours if you want. So and the way you do it, you can do it in such a way that it's non-disruptive, right? You can actually, basically what it brings up is like a secondary copy of the kernel, patches that, and then swaps and then shuts down the old one, and you can keep going. So that's something that Microsoft and Apple both need to do and address. If I had to guess, I would say if Apple decides to do it, they can get it done quicker. Now that the new CEO is going to be a hardware guy, whether he sees this or not and sees this as a priority or not, it's to be determined. But these slow behemoths that are running our operating systems are putting us at risk. And we need to apply pressure. Every single one of us needs to apply pressure to them to start live patching. I think it's critical. Well, I think there's another thing that we're sort of glazing over here, and that is the fact that for a long time, security was our concern. We would probe bugs, we would find things, we would do it. And then the vendors like Microsoft and Apple and folks associated with Linux distributions came up with programs for you. You can get this program, and Red Hat or Microsoft, whatever, will come and fix everything for you. And now they're overloaded, which means you have to pay attention, again, to more than just the anomaly, the segmentation, All that stuff has to be in your purvey. You can't ignore it anymore. And this really sucks, because if you look at the recommended priority of what's going on with this current Patch Tuesday that just passed, Active Directory Federation services, oh, that's not important. Basically, anything that runs Microsoft that holds a file, validates who you are, or faces the internet is vulnerable.
Yeah.
And you have to patch them now. This is the case, but I agree with you. I would love Apple's based on sort of a BSD microkernel infrastructure. I don't see why they couldn't implement live patching. I don't know if anybody's working on it. Microsoft, I don't know. I've never been inside their kernel.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if it could happen. But like you said, it's going to take a while, even if they do decide to do it. So even if they decided today to do this, they're not going to have it out for quite a while. So because it is going to require a re-architecture of the kernel. So that's not something that they can just turn around. So in the meantime, we need to protect ourselves. And as Lou said, we need microsegmentation. We need zero trust. We need, maybe put more things, unfortunately, behind VPNs, which is really problematic from a pain in the butt standpoint. But I think that we need to do that. But speaking of things that are a pain in the butt, Lou, what's going on with the job market?
This was one out of left field, but it's one we're always dealing with in IT, right? And John and I were sort of talking about this pre-show, and depending on the type of company you're at, you either feel like you're going to be the elite and you're going to hire people who came up from somewhere else, or you're going to hire folks right out of school and you're going to train them. So, and there's continuums in between this, but we're all seeing an increasing challenge in this. AI, I think, has brought it to the surface, but it was coming anyway. This one comes to us from MSN, but obviously it's aggregated through a bunch more stuff. There's a paradox right now, and it's less about AI eliminating jobs and more about a structural mismatch in the United States labor market. So this is specific to the US, but we have actually seen some of this mismatch playing out in other markets like India and stuff, where we're seeing AI growing and other things fading away. So a historic labor shortage is emerging, right? Folks in the baby boomers generation, our generation that's following right behind us, Gen X people, are starting to retire out of this. And we're the ones who were dragged through IT by our ankles, right? We have the scars. That's how we learned this stuff, because there was nowhere to go to learn this when it first came out. So what happened is we're going to be losing millions more experienced workers than we can replace, 4.6 to 6 million. The problem is we have a mismatch. Colleges continue to produce a large number of graduates in fields like business and finance, but we've got a shortage of nurses and physicians, teachers, engineers, and I would put the engineering category right there on IT as well. Yeah. Because what we're absolutely have learned at this point is that AI is amazing, but it's an amplifier. It's not a signal, right? You still have to know how to build stuff. That's engineering, right? Software engineering, computer science, stuff like that. There was this initial tide going out of saying, well, we don't need these folks anymore. And then the tide's coming back in again. So, but we're not getting them, right? Construction workers, aircraft mechanics, mental health care professionals, semiconductor technicians, and engineers going to have a massive impact on what we're going to be able to do. AI is blamed, but it isn't the primary cause, because most of the occupations facing the biggest shortage resolve physical, technical, or interpersonal work AI can't do, right?
Yeah.
John and I have been in this sector for quite a long time. Really, the hardest part of the job is actually figuring out what the requirement is.
Yep.
And when you're in sales, when you're called in on a sales call, as I've noted, a lot of your time is spent just figuring out that a customer will call you in because they've identified a problem and they think they know what the solution is, but they're not always aware of all their options. And you often end up with a very different solution than what they originally envisioned. John, what is your feeling on this?
Yeah, so I think this highlights two different problems. One is the skills mismatch being that people are training in the wrong skills. They're training in business and finance when we have a shortage of nurses, teachers, engineers, construction workers, mechanics, and things like that. So that's partially a what I want to be when I grow up problem. It's also a partially a university problem. But I think the
Big time.
other problem that's out there is even those that are going into those skilled areas, let's say engineering, let's say programming and app development, things like that. Because of the use of AI, you need less in the way of junior people and more people that can really act almost as a development manager that's got a bunch of agents writing code for them and then being able to review it. And so then you hire a 21 or 22-year-old right out of college and then try to get them to do that. And because the colleges aren't training them to be senior developers, they're training them on like, here's how C++ works or how Rust works or whatever it might be, then they're not ready for it. So I, I think this is a middle management problem. And I just did a big executive summit for consultancy job that I have. And what I noticed is that this is a small company, but they're doing something right here. They've got some other issues I'm helping them work through, but they hire a lot of interns right out of college. And I actually met with one of them, and they deep dive, throw them right into Claude Code, Gemini, OpenAI's Codex, all of that in right away, and they give that person a mentor who is a senior developer and gets them to start thinking in that way. And that's the middle management problem that we need to solve. And I think that these large companies have massive middle management issues. That's why we're seeing, and we've talked about this before, companies like Amazon forcing the work from office mandate because the middle managers can't manage people remotely. They don't know how to. Big companies, actually all companies, need to be thinking about those middle managers and making sure that they are doing their job and they know how to do their job so they get the proper training on not only how to manage people remote, but also mentor them or provide a connection to somebody else that can mentor them on how to think as in an agentic world. How do I use agents to be more productive versus just trying to hire somebody with 20 years of experience?
And
Speaking of
yeah,
20 years of
because
experience, I'm going to qualify. Lou's a boomer. I'm Gen X. I'm not that old yet.
I'm not a boomer. I'm right
You
on
are a
the
boomer.
edge of Gen X, right on the edge of Gen X. But one thing I can tell you, there's another model you can look at that's extremely successful, and that is what the United States military does. And I have extensive experience
Yeah.
with that on the job training and how do you do that? Every stage of your career, you get more training. And
Yeah.
the problem is companies have gotten lazy. They've said, well, training is all the problem of the colleges. Right? It used to be if you went to somewhere like IBM or Hewlett Packard or something like that, some of the larger companies, more traditional ones, training was part of your entire career path. And because we sort of blew up those career paths and said, well, you're just going to go to whoever you want, we're not going to, we've sort of made the decision we're not going to invest in your training. You need to invest in training. You need to invest in training people in your system and accept that some of them are going to take that knowledge and go somewhere else because that is the key to the success of the Silicon Valley. The training got spread around, would get recycled through more and more companies and would come back to you through through other workers with new improvements, and the entire tide lifted. It's very counterintuitive, but it does work that way. If you have a large pool of people that are getting a very disparate knowledge base and then cross multiplying it between each other, you end up the best practices come up and the worst practices tend to fall away. And that is how the valley works, right? You talk with your friends, you move around, you do your things. You need to produce in your company a version of that. You need to think about those unwritten things that you do that are required for your job. You need to write them down and you
Yeah.
need to train people on them.
All right. Speaking of lack of training, Anthropic and Blackstone are making a big bet on what's they think is the next $1 trillion opportunity when it comes to AI, and it's not making models. It's about AI implementation. And so what they're saying is, this is a great article in TechCrunch, that the next $1 trillion company is not going to be somebody making a new frontier model or a better tool. It's about helping enterprises implement those tools. So there's a lot of great tools out there, both the frontier models and also the shims on top of them that allow you to do things like the coding tools and so forth. But the problem comes in with the actual integration into the corporate workflow. So that's your business processes, your legacy systems, your enterprise workflows, and then your governance and security. So as we're shifting from AI being a technology race, it's becoming an execution race. And so this company that Anthropic and Blackstone have put together is called Ode, and that's really what it's going to focus on. It's going to provide AI integration services, workflow automations, data preparation, change management, and then oversee the security and governance. So this is a really important step, and I think that I think it's a really good idea, and it's something that's really needed. That I see way too many people and companies that are just using AI wrong. They're just using it as a search engine, or they're using it as, just at the very surface level. But if it's not fully integrated, again, we've been saying over and over and over again, and we're not the only ones saying it, is that AI is not going to take your job, but somebody using AI will. That is true
Absolutely.
in the corporate world as well. AI is not going to crush your company, but another company using AI will. Lou, what do you think?
This is a great sign because essentially this is acknowledging reality. We've moved from science experiment to production.
Yeah,
Those of us who use this technology on a more often, basis have known this for a couple of months. The I would consider like the 5 series models that we're seeing from OpenAI and Anthropic and others, the latest models in the past 6 months have been breakthrough models. They are
yeah,
actually incredibly useful. They can augment as a tool. They can augment all sorts of things. But this is a problem that we've run into before in the past. Like, look at your automation systems, for example, networking and applications like StackStorm or Salt Stack or anything like that. If something can do anything, if a vendor walks into you and says, this can do anything, the, it's going to sit in front of you and it'll do nothing, right? You need to understand how it can move into your workflow. And people sort of have a very weird view of AI that I talk to. And
yeah.
because the true impact of this is going to be when your neighbor who's in finance is ranting about AI and how great it is. You don't hear a lot of that yet. It's mostly us, right?
Yeah. Yep.
It's not helped by the fact that we have outside forces that are trying to decelerate the implementation of AI to get state level leadership over our country, right? Or the West in this case. And obviously you can put a name to those individuals. We've seen them before, but having somebody come in and show you the low-hanging fruit is going to be very lucrative.
It is. It is. And I think it's also valuable. This is a lot of times you see these companies pop up, consulting companies and things like that, and they don't always provide the value that you pay for. Assuming that you hire the right one, and they have to have a pedigree. You need to find not just some random consulting company. Find somebody that's got a pedigree in AI. And I think that they're really going to help you here. You need to investigate this. And at the end of the day, they will save you money. They will make you money by making you more efficient and helping you with that implementation. And I think that it's wise to not just assume that you can do it correctly, especially if you're at a big corporate environment where there's just all these people that are resistant to AI, but because they're scared of it or they just don't get it. Helping them implement into your workflow and your back end processes and such like that will be a game changer. And then they will start to see the value and become converts as well. But before we wrap up today, I did want to give you some listener feedback. And regarding last week's episode where we talked about how Windows was falling below the 60% market penetration threshold, BJ wrote to us on YouTube and said that the Windows market share story surprised me the most. I don't think Windows is disappearing. I just think that the operating system matters less than it used to. Between browsers, cloud apps, and AI, I spend most of my day in the same tools regardless of what OS I'm running. And that's a great point that BJ made here, is that, it is, a browser or a mobile device that I tend to spend the majority of my time in. I also happen to spend quite a bit of time in a ChatGPT app or something like that. But the operating system doesn't matter as much, and it's mattering even less than it used to. A lot of us, I moved over to Mac 15, 16 years ago, and there were times when that really struggled, and I would sometimes have to virtualize Windows so I could run specific apps. I haven't had to do that in a long, long time outside of gaming. And so I think that he's absolutely right. And that is the direction we're going to continue to see. And I think that you could have somebody running on a Chromebook be just as efficient as somebody running in Windows, and probably more secure.
Yeah, no doubt there.
Right. So that is going to cover this episode. We couldn't do this podcast without listeners like you. We would love to hear what you think. Do you have another topic you want us to cover? Do you think that maybe we got something wrong? You want to just throw in your 2 cents on one of these topics? Send email to feedback@itsparkcast.com. Hit us up on X @ITSparkcast. Or if you're on YouTube like BJ, you can leave a comment down below. We do read every comment. We respond to most. And if it's particularly interesting or insightful, we will read it out on the broadcast. Make sure you hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. That way you never miss an episode. And we will be back next week with more insights from the world of enterprise IT. Take care.
Thanks for stopping by. We'll see you next week.